William Burroughs' writings repeat misogynistic themes, motifs, and tropes, an example of which would be from the job, quote, "Women are a perfect curse. I think they were a basic mistake, and the whole pluralistic universe evolved from this error." To best explain this misogyny, without glossing over it, without softening or whitewashing it, I think it's best to say that Burroughs harbors misogyny, as one harbors a parasite. For one whose work recurrently describes, navigates, and critiques the logic of the virus and parasite, Burroughs' own concepts of cellular assimilation, equilibrium, and the soft machine can be used to perform a critique of Burroughs' own misogyny that I think can more creatively and productively digest it. Key to my idea is the notion that one harbors a parasite. They are an invading presence that establishes connections, a very important word in Burroughs, with the body, aka the soft machine. This notion of harboring is key to Burroughs' philosophy of identity, wherein there is no essential self hidden beneath masks that hide. Burroughs, perhaps more than any other, was all masks. He thrived on the performativity of what one does, establishing routine behaviors with what become habits and, in this process, one's identity. Existence, indeed, precedes essence. As such, all identity is something manifested through behaviors. But how do we get these behaviors? Do we choose them, or are they some core part of our identity? Burroughs rejects both of these answers, as the former naively presumes libertarian free will, and the latter is the very reason one should be skeptical of such free will. Namely, if it were the case that our behaviors are invading forces which parasitize our energy, establishing symptomatic routines, then is not all that makes up our supposed core of our identity not rather the very opposite of a core? Is it not rather that these invading routines that parasitize one arrive from somewhere else? Would not our identity then be a parasitic accretion that we harbor, nurturing through repetition for the tempting comfortability their normalcy gives us? This is most certainly the case for misogyny, and all of what has preceded can be taken both generally as describing all parasites and metaphorically as describing the dynamics of misogyny, how it perturbates, invades, assimilates, and reproduces itself in generations of people. The inequality between women and men facilitated by misogyny is not natural or necessary, but the result of enforcement, and you can't spell enforcement without force. Misogyny, to thrive and do its job, must therefore have a method of replication and a series of illusory advantages it gives to its hosts. Burroughs seems to have been a victim to misogyny and patriarchy at large's convenient but flawed truths. To understand why this might have been the case, and therefore why Burroughs features misogyny across his writing, we must delve deep into Burroughs, the anxietized man. Constantly faced with festering repression concerning his affluent, privileged, bourgeois American origins, Burroughs harbors with him a great many parasites of childhood through the whole of his life. Indeed, it is because of his personal acquaintance with lingering parasitic hosts that, no matter what he did, seemed to seep through and threaten him, that calling his misogyny harbored is so apt and useful. By investigating some of the salient facts of Burroughs' childhood, we can hopefully understand better how and why his misogyny manifests and functions. What is most both salient and paradoxical is how close Burroughs was to his mother, how much she adored him, saying, "I worship the ground you walk on." They indeed were constantly connected through some magical medium. Laura, his mother, was extremely interested in psychic phenomena, and Burroughs often spoke of her as having clairvoyant powers, Billy had a dream accompanied by a smell of coal gas that he was standing in front of his mother, leaning over her like a dinosaur and eating her back. This is Burroughs. Now mother comes screaming into the room. I had a terrible dream that you were eating my back. I have a long neck that reaches up and over her head. My face in the dream is wooden with horror. This dream recurred throughout his life and was described in a number of his books. He and Laura seemed to be psychically connected. His childhood memories were almost all of his mother. Quote, I remembered a long time ago when I lay in bed beside my mother, watching lights from the street move across the ceiling and down the walls. I felt the sharp nostalgia of train whistles, piano music down a city street, burning leaves. Not only was Burroughs close with and fond of his mother, but also his nurse employed by his family, with whom he was so attached that if she was to leave the room for too long, he would go into hysterical tantrums and fits, something that we can now understand as a symptom of an anxious attachment style, and therefore tied up with many of his childhood anxieties. Nursey, the nickname of his nurse, was nevertheless responsible for a major trauma that occurred when Burroughs was 4 years old. Something so extreme and shocking that despite 10 years of psychoanalysis, he was never able to properly retrieve it. This, indeed, I think, is tied up in his very complex and problematic relationship to women as it would play out in his adult life and especially in his writing. Different analysts proposed various explanations, and Burroughs himself eventually identified some elements of the event. One Thursday in the late summer or autumn of 1918, possibly because of little Bill's hysterical tantrums, Mary Evans, his nurse, took him along with her on her day off. Mary Evans had a girlfriend whose boyfriend was a veterinarian who worked from his home on the outskirts of St. Louis. They were there for a picnic. It seems that Burroughs had been there before because he also had a dim memory of seeing the vet deliver a foal, though he felt this might be a screen memory. The general consensus among his analysts was that Mary had encouraged Billy to fillet the vet, and that, scared, Billy had bitten the man's penis, causing him to smack Bill on the head. Bill also theorized that he had witnessed Mary and her girlfriend having sex, giving rise to an infantile idea that women had penises. But why would Mary have risked allowing Billy to watch, unless this was part of the same scenario involving the vet? Whatever happened, it disturbed Billy greatly, and he told his brother. Bill later remembered Mort saying, "Should we tell on Nursey?" But they didn't. Afterward, Billy had dreams in which Mary Evans threatened him if he should ever tell what happened. He told another psychiatrist that he wished Nursey and her girlfriend dead, and he felt deeply guilty for feeling this. Indeed, he also remembers her one time catching him masturbating and threatening to cut off his penis. So as we can see, Burroughs had some very complex early childhood relationships to women and experiences with women that we can doubtless assume affected him as he traveled through life. And one mustn't also forget, when living in Mexico City in 1951, he shot his own wife in the head when playing a drunken game of William Tell. And while the accounts of this event differ greatly, and the culpability can be placed on different parties according to the permutation, it's nevertheless the case that this was an extremely impactful event on Burroughs, and also one that involved a very important woman in his life. Indeed, he said that my accidental shooting of my wife in 1951 has been a heavy, painful burden to me for 41 years. It was a horrible thing, and it still hurts to realize that some people think it was somehow deliberate. I've been honest about the circumstances. We were both very drunk and reckless. She dared me to shoot a glass off her head, and for God knows what reason, I took the dare. All my life, I have regretted that day. And yet many people seem mistaken about the culpability that Burroughs felt for this, considering his introduction to Queer, where he says, "I am forced to the appalling conclusion that I would never have become a writer but for Joan's death, and to a realization of the extent to which this event has motivated and formulated my writing. I live with the constant threat of possession and a constant need to escape from possession, from control. So the death of Joan brought me in contact with the invader, the ugly spirit, and maneuvered me into a lifelong struggle in which I have had no choice except to write my way out." Considering how many properly traumatic instances of Burroughs's life directly involved women, it's no wonder that his relationship with them, his beliefs towards them, would be so complicated, so filled with anxiety, with variety, almost as a sort of obfuscation. As a way to explore his espoused beliefs about women, I want to look at this Gender Trouble, a critical roundtable on Burroughs and gender, by Anne Douglas, Anne Wadman, and Regina Weinreich. In this interview, I think these women do an admirable job to account for Burroughs's misogyny, but I think they're at the very least far too charitable, if not straight whitewashing of Burroughs's misogyny. And I think we can do a lot of straight up critique of Burroughs's misogyny. And as long as we don't ask Burroughs's literature to be something like a feminist manifesto or a credo for women, then I think we can accept the horridness and the preponderance of misogyny in his writings without having to throw out his writings entirely. First, Wadman, pushing back on the simple application of misogynist to Burroughs, says he was comfortable with Susan Sontag. He was comfortable with empowered women artists, poets, and writers who already knew what they were doing, who had a certain kind of intellectual gravitas, who could hold their own. He was close to Patti Smith and Laurie Anderson and myself. In Bill's class sessions, I never saw any kind of distinction between male and female members of his class. If you looked Bill in the eye and you had a question and you weren't trying to get anything out of him more than intellectually, you were on safe turf. This paints a fairly egalitarian picture of Burroughs, and Weinreich seconds this, saying, "I had the same experience with Bill that you, Wadman, had, because he was always a gentleman. He would stand up if a woman walked into the room, but it was more than that. He asked you questions. He was interested in you." Now, this is where things start to get a little bit simplistic, at the very least naive. I think the danger is always that when trying to be charitable to those of the past, we worship them for doing the bare minimum. Just because they're not outwardly misogynistic, for example, that therefore is penance somehow for overtly misogynistic things that they say. Indeed, Weinreich was once interviewing Burroughs in Omni magazine, and she came to his bunker and said, "Well, William, it says right here, a boy's book." This is the subtitle of Cities of the Red Night. "What does this mean, a boy's book? Are you trying to separate the boys from the girls?" And he said, "Oh, no, no, no." And he leapt up and he pulled a manuscript out of a drawer. "Don't you see? Women are a biological mistake." I said, "Oh, right," remembering some ideas he had written that he took as fact. And then he added, "But so is everything else." And he went into a whole anthropological discourse, citing Darwin, explaining all the different permutations and changes that occur in evolution, and it was very, very persuasive. "Well, what about reproduction?" I asked. And then he turned to me and he said, "You know, the way women are used right now, you're nothing more than flower pots." Okay, I thought. "Don't you know we're just a few years behind cloning?" he went on. And suddenly I got what he was doing, which was really putting on one of his personae for the purposes of this interview. I was also putting his performance together with something that I noticed at the Nova Convention, some of the more bizarre ideas he had put together with Brian Geisen. We are here to go, Geisen used to say. There is something out there that we're all heading for, and when we go, we're not going to really want our bodies, male or female. So with that thought in mind, I took what he was saying as an ideology, an intellectual construct, a belief system, and left it at that. Now I think, honestly, this is an evasive, perhaps far too charitable interpretation of his continually espousing misogynistic ideology. I get what she's trying to do, putting it in context with those that Burroughs was around, the people that he admired, which he said he admired Geisen the most of anybody. But I think it honestly doesn't hold Burroughs' feet to the fire enough. But I think if we do this little bit of autocritique, I'm saying, with this idea of harboring misogyny, I think we better understand the dynamics of misogyny and all other forms, therefore, of bigotry and prejudice. And I think we do it in a way that gives his concepts the amount they're due, but also takes Burroughs to task. As a final note, I am not trying to minimize Burroughs' misogyny by implying that it is merely an ephemeral accretion and not who he truly was or what he truly believed, that he merely harbors it. Rather, if one follows this philosophy of parasitism to its logical conclusion, one must conclude that all behaviors, ideologies, and beliefs are such parasites, and there is no essential self. Furthermore, this does not mean that all parasites are all equal in moral weight, and that therefore misogyny is equal to stewardship, compassion, or generosity in virtue and utility. One can and should still differentiate between what is healthy, productive, and right for people, and what is harmful, even deadly, in the inequality that results from our tacit consent to it, such as is the case with misogyny and all other forms of bigotry and prejudice. That being said, that's all for this short video essay. I hope it's given you something to think about, and I welcome any thoughts that people have in the comments. This is something I'm still actively concerned with and struggling with as I read through Burroughs' oeuvre. In fact, I refuse to pick up The Wild Boys because it is so overtly Lord of the Flies style boys club, just taking these virile stereotypes about masculinity and the power that comes with that, and basically exiling all females explicitly from his fictional kingdom. I think that work is incredibly problematic, and I get mad when I read it. So my relationship with Burroughs' misogyny is very critical. And I'm very critical of it precisely because I think he's such a good artist, and I think, therefore, he deserves to be taken seriously and his feet seriously held to the fire. You can check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic literature. You can also become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which I can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you'd just like to donate to the channel, because it really helps me out, helps me purchase the books necessary to run this channel, and gives me that sense of security that I do not take for granted, and I appreciate everyone who donates in any way, even their time. That being said, that's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.